Well, friends, welcome to the Kogo Podcast. My name's R.W. Moody. I'm the Next Gen Pastor here with Kogo Ministries, and we're so excited to have you with us today on the Kogo Podcast. Don't forget that the purpose of this podcast is to move leaders in Ohio to be challenged through bite-sized conversations about ministry, leadership, and growth. And so we would invite you in these few moments just to take a listen, to step into your God call, and to be challenged as we move here together in the great state of Ohio. And so today on the podcast, we're going to talk about a pretty important subject. And we covered this subject about a few months ago after Start Fresh back in 2025. But we decided we wanted to kind of approach this again. And the reason why is because our guest today, Joe, was one who reached out and was like, hey, have you ever thought about talking about this part? And so we're going to hopefully challenge you as leaders today just to be thinking about artificial intelligence, what AI means for us as leaders moving forward. So Joe Watkins, thank you so much for your time today. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Glad to be here.
We are so glad that you're here. Joe, you reached out to me several months ago after listening to the podcast with Aaron Holman and, sitting at Starbucks talking about some of your heart regarding ministry, and this thing called artificial intelligence was very obvious. We needed to connect with this subject on leadership. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. This has been something I've thought about for a long time, specifically around the questions of how does the church have a good posture for ministering in a world that's rapidly changing, and so this seems like an awesome opportunity to get to raise some of those questions and think through some of that with somebody. And so I really appreciate it. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, before we dive into that, tell us a little about you, where you serve, and what capacity you serve at. I know that. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about Joe Watkins.
Sure. Yeah. So right now I work as a graphic designer actually for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It's a campus ministry across the country on college campuses. I'm a part of a great creative team, and we create resources for our chapters there at the different schools to use and to help equip them for ministry and things. That's always been, the design piece has always been a part of my background all the way through college and things. But it's always run parallel with some ministry, with different ministry parts of my life too. So I've served as a youth pastor and I've served as a senior pastor. And so I have a real heart for the church and for hoping to see just kind of how we engage with the world around us really well and really in the love of Christ. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your heart for ministry and as well as students. I mean, from our conversation, student ministry is real close to my heart.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate those people who go the extra mile to help young people be all that they can be in Christ. So, Joe, the conversation about artificial intelligence, it seems to be everywhere. I mean, you can't watch the news. You can't get a snippet on your phone without something AI being there. And so as a result of that recent podcast, we had a great conversation together, what we're going to talk about today. So, what do you see as one of the biggest challenges when it comes to artificial intelligence and intersecting with the church?
So one of the biggest challenges is that when we say AI, we mean a whole lot of different things. It's a really broad category of technology. And so there's an element of AI that is what is called the large language models, things like ChatGPT, that are kind of the stuff most people are talking about. And I think what a lot of people have in their head right now when they imagine AI are the things that can generate scripts or videos or pictures and things like that. And that's certainly a piece of it. But there's also a whole lot of other productivity-based artificial intelligence that live in all of different sectors of business and academia and organizations. Just across the board, there are all these different ways that AI can be used to do different things. And I think that's what, as I started to get introduced to these different kinds of AI
Yes.
in some work I was doing, um, I kept coming back to this challenge of realizing that this technology is going to have a massive impact on jobs and the future of work in our society. One of the things I don't that doesn't happen often when we talk about artificial intelligence right now is that is that when it's talked about in different sectors, especially in business,
Yeah.
it's very rarely talked about by itself. It's usually talked about in relationship to robotics and automation.
Gotcha.
Those three things together kind of live as this like business solution reality. And when you start to put those three things together, you really start to impact um, the workforce and jobs and what can be done with AI. And so um, it the more that I learn about it, the more that I hear about it, the more that I see those things in relationship to one another, the more it became impressed upon me over time that like we're really going to see a workforce shift
Gotcha.
in the world. I think in Ohio we're probably a little more sensitive to this because so many of us live either in towns and communities that have been impacted by the loss of jobs over the last 30 years, or we're adjacent to those communities. I live on the north side of Dayton, and when we drive down through downtown, we see all of the manufacturing where GM used to be and all the
Yeah.
empty buildings and stuff like that. And so um, we know what it can do to communities when there's a massive shift in workforce.
Right.
And it's just hard not to see that kind of shift happening, except just in loads and loads of um, other career options and workspaces and things. And so I think that raises this real challenge for the church in asking, well, how do we be prepared to minister to people who are seeing themselves facing a more difficult and uphill a battle when it comes to challenges around work and things like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute
Hmm.
because I think
Sure.
you're absolutely right when it comes to being prepared. I mean, to go back to that Boy Scout motto, be prepared.
Hmm. Yeah.
We've got to be ready for what that could do. Um, Quick little side note, as you were talking about
Hmm. Sure.
GPT, was with my son and working on just something for state youth convention. He was like, "Hey, Dad, let me help you out with this for a minute," because I was racking my brain, and he just
Hmm.
literally typed in the scripture, typed in what this event was about, and I don't remember if he used another keyword. He, hit enter on his chat GPT account, and all of a sudden this like script just like comes out. And I'm like,
Oh yeah.
I was like,
Hmm.
whoa, this is
Yeah.
crazy. But like, I think we need to be prepared for
Hmm.
that. So how do pastors and congregational leaders best prepare for some of these challenges that we may face?
Yeah, I think that's there are loads and loads of ways that I think we can prepare for this. Um, I think my answer to that would kind of come in two buckets, right? There's kind of the like conceptual teaching bucket, and then maybe some more practical, like on the ground kinds of things bucket. So
Gotcha.
from a conceptual teaching thing, I think it's really important for churches to be um, teaching and thinking and preaching and talking about things like what does it mean to be human? And how does God want us to relate to the work that we do? One of the challenges I think folks have experienced over the last few decades as work has shifted in certain communities is this realization that like I believe I had a picture in my head of what it meant to be a person who worked and what the value of that work was and the meaning behind that work. And I don't know that people consciously always think in these terms, but I think that imagination lives there.
Yeah.
And then when that work is gone, there's a real question of like, well, now who am I and what do I do? And how do I have what I need and how do I care for my family?
Mhm.
And so I think having real conversations about like who has God created us to be? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does it mean to be given a vocation by God, even from as far back as the garden, right? Like if we study the early pages of Genesis and what it means to be put in a garden and called to tend it and care for it and tame it and make it flourish or help it flourish. We see that we're called to these kinds of activities of both bringing what is wild and what is chaotic and what is rough into order, and on also being people who are creative and make things new and bring things to being. Um, and then that happens in all kinds of ways in the world that we live today.
Yeah.
And so having those conversations in our congregation and helping people imagine that God's actually called us into those kinds of roles, whether or not God has called us into a specific job or a specific task or a specific ministry. We have the capacity to do those kinds of things, maybe regardless of one specific job or another. And I think that kind of imagination actually runs a little bit counter to the stories in the world that we live, because in the culture we live in, so much of what we're called to do is around production. It's around how much can I produce? How much can I how much value can I bring to my employer or to what it is that I'm bringing into the economy? There's just this real economic framing around work. And the reality is that robotics and AI are going to like challenge a lot of that, because they're going to be able to do a lot of this stuff better and faster and more efficiently. Like you were saying, click the button, here's the whole thing,
Right.
in a snap. Work that would have taken you who knows how long to get finished. And so I think that's a big picture, like kind of theoretical kind of talk, like preaching. What's the content of our sermons? What kind of imagination do we have for what it means to be human in the world that God's created? And then I think on the practical side of it, I really think a lot of it has to do with tending to the community of the church. And rather than seeing, like, how do you create activities, daily, like weekly rhythms in the congregation, an understanding that we are doing this faith and life thing together, as opposed to what is, I think, not always the assumption in the church, but that is certainly the assumption in the culture, that we're all individuals that happen to come into a space together on a Sunday morning, right? Because as you know, if you think of any one community where maybe jobs disappear, what is left is the community.
Right.
And if you have a strong, rich, vibrant community that knows how to care for each other when they are in need or share in the load of everyday living, whether that's financial or physical or whatever that is, you have a community of people who can then help carry others through that journey of, oh wait, everything has changed in my life personally, in the lives around us. What do we do now? And that becomes we'll figure that out together kind of thing. And I actually think it's interesting in my experience. I think that's something that some of our smaller rural communities could actually teach some of our larger churches and some of the churches in urban areas, because, or especially suburban areas, because in my experience, those rural churches have been really, really good at that community piece. They really live as a community together in ways that I think are valuable and will become more valuable going forward.
So what I'm hearing you say, Joe, conversation and relationship.
Yeah.
So have some
sure.
conversation, be intentional with that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to talk about it, but also keep building on those relationships that we have.
Yep.
So, I mean, the whole idea of conversation and relationship, I think, is important, because we want to make sure that we address the elephant in the room. I think so many times, you know, we don't do a very good job, whether it's in the life of the church or whether something else, where we don't address the elephant. And, you know, AI as you were talking about community, so one of the things that I know of several churches that do is use AI for good. So they'll,
Hmm.
create devotionals, they'll create
Hmm.
conversations for out of AI, and use that content for processing or whatnot. So
Hmm.
I see the value of it and having that conversation and pointing toward the good of it, not necessarily just the bad. But
Sure, sure.
so Joe, as you kind of take a 30,000-foot look,
Hmm.
what do you anticipate being a tension point between AI and biblical truth?
Mm.
How do followers of Jesus Christ best weed through that tension to discover the truth as it relates to biblical
Hmm.
principles?
Um, I think that's a really good question that's challenging to answer specifically around things like AI. I think I think truth itself is one of the big challenges. So the idea that truth exists is certainly something that's been up for grabs in recent years, as anyways. Um, but one of the challenges of AI is that it challenges, like it allows for the creation of things that aren't true, that don't
Right.
exist,
Right.
that aren't real. And so there's this like micro reality around truth that is like, hey, is that video that I just watched real? Like
Yeah.
it's already gotten to the point where it's hard to tell a lot of times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and so like, how do you trust what you're seeing every day? How do you trust that there is anything that can even be trusted? How do you trust anything that you can even call to be true? Um, and inside of that, there's just that whole idea of how do you evaluate that, and how do you do it in a way that doesn't turn you so cynical that you don't trust anything ever? I think that's a piece of it, but I think there's also some like larger, like big story truths that I think we have to we have to kind of wrestle with as AI starts to introduce them into our society and into our everyday life and thinking. And I think what's going to make it challenging is that unlike some of the other things that we've gone back and forth with culture around, or other things we've tried to process through, there's like no Bible verses to go find about AI. Like,
Yeah.
like I can't go look up the passage about robots in, one of Paul's letters to go,
Right.
okay, well, at least this is a starting point. And so I think understanding that, like, growing in the ability to take biblical ideas and develop like rich theology around those, from those ideas, is something that's going to be a skill that's really important in the church. Um, and one of like for instance, one of the things that is challenging, already being challenged by AI, is this question of like, well, what kind of beings are we?
Mm.
Um, are we primarily brains, like thinking beings, um, that exist in some other relationship with things around us and things that are spiritual? Are we primarily spiritual beings? Like, I used I've often referred to it as like the Yoda theology of like, we're not, luminous beings, are we, not this
Right.
crude material, right? Like that kind of like really what we are spirits, or are we like created physical embodied beings that have this unique relationship with the creation and our creator? And the thing that AI raises is that it raises loads of questions around those first two, especially because there are like a lot of the same folks that are pushing more and more advancements in AI carry with them ideas that like, oh, what we really are just brains or computer program, like that function like computer programs.
Yeah.
And so if we can just figure out how to download ourselves onto other hardware, we could live forever. Like this sounds like a crazy conversation to have, but it's a conversation that serious people with serious money and serious technology are literally having. Um, and we don't have to have those conversations for AI to raise those questions, because AI is gaining, like, as especially in these like large language models and chatbots and things like that. Um, it's already starting to raise questions about identity and personhood and things like that. Um, in places where there's been a faster, more aggressive embrace of, for instance, like chatbots, we're already starting to see people having to deal with um, the emotional and relational reality of what happens when I update my chatbot and now its identity is totally different again, and I have developed a personal relationship with this chatbot, and now it doesn't sound like my friend the chatbot anymore.
Right.
And all of the emotional distress that that's creating in people. Um, and so there's this real sense of like, if we only understand ourselves as brains, and I really even think if we only understand ourselves as spirits, and we don't see ourselves as like embodied, created beings that God has made and has placed in the midst of our creation, and then indwelled with His Spirit to bring life,
Yes.
um, we start to really find ourselves unable to speak good news into those spaces where people are saying, hey, you could live forever. You could have a friend that tells you all the best things about you all of the time. Like, all of these kinds of like ideas that want to put artificial intelligence and the related technologies on the same level of what it means to be human. And I don't think you can answer that question with like a Bible verse. I think it takes like real deep, prayerful, theological reflection on the Bible and on the story of Scripture and on what God actually says about us and reveals about us in Jesus, that matters, so that we have real good news to give to folks.
Yeah. You've kind of already hit on this a little bit, Joe, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the relational aspect
Mm-hmm.
of AI and how it, interacts with us, but how, in what ways does artificial intelligence like disrupt the relational aspect of creation? I mean, God created us to be in relationship with people.
Mm-hmm.
So how does AI, how does it
Mm-hmm.
disrupt that?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I think it does it. I have three things that come very quickly to my brain. I'll see if I can remember all three of them as I go. One is that it disrupts our relationship with other people. Because the more that we find our solutions to certain things in technology, the less we feel like we need other people.
Right. Right. Oh yeah.
So I work with a group of designers at InterVarsity, and like the AI that's doing image generation is getting better and better and better at it, and it won't take very long for me to be able to click a button, and it's not even that. I mean, it's even something I could open Photoshop or Illustrator right now and do.
Yeah.
Open a button, open an app, put in a prompt, click a button, and I have an image. And as it gets better and better at that, I could do that more and more without the help of anybody around me, without my team. Other people could do it without me as a designer, right? And you get the solution that you wanted without the relationship with other people. And I can say that, like, as somebody who has cherished working with my design team to come up with some beautiful work together, I'm lesser for it if that's the way that I can come to those solutions.
Yeah.
So, and then also the ways that we interact with other people for all of the other things that we need, that like relationships give us in life. Like it is not good for humans to be alone is the first problem that comes up in the pages of scripture. And this is AI becomes a thing that can tempt us back into that reality
Right. Right.
because it feels like we're in relationship with someone. But it also like it can disrupt our relationships with other people around us. It can disrupt relationships with ourselves, like internally, like who do I know that I am, and how do I understand myself and my mental health and my mental and spiritual being. Like one of the things that we've started to notice with chatbot relationships are that, like, at the end of the day, all they want to do is tell you everything you want to know and want to hear. Like they are like the most like flattering, like tell you all, yes, the best idea you've ever had. You're such a great person. You're such an awesome human being. I'm so lucky to be in relationship with you. Like all, like however the chatbots puts it, it becomes this reinforcing cycle of a false version of myself.
Yeah.
Um, that will like not just puff up, but then also like disconnect us from those pieces of us that are less than the absolute perfect version of us we want to be.
Yeah.
Um, which is interesting because like in my I don't know how your experience, but my experience with God has been that like as I've grown in those areas that I'm like, I wish I were, or I think I'm supposed to be, or this is not something that I want in my life. It's never a linear like checkbox and now that's gone. The person I become as God grows me in those areas is a different kind of person altogether that I couldn't have gotten to from a 1, 2, 3 step. And you start to write that process out the more you're relating through chatbots and through AI and through technology and stuff. So yeah, I had a third one and it's not in my brain anymore. And so that's probably enough.
No, I mean, I think obviously the point of being isolated,
Yeah.
being more in focus than outward focused, you hit that. And then, again, Jesus created us to be people who need each other. And it's funny you mentioned about the chat box, kind of flattering you. My son used very similar language the other day, talking about that very thing with my wife and I, just saying, they're steadier, incline for AIs to be more encouraging, more you got this, or it's all about you, which again affects how we interact with people, how we interact with ourselves, and honestly, how we interact with Jesus himself. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
eventually we'll come to the place where it could draw us to, well, we don't need Jesus anymore. We've got salvation in other ways, which, that's obviously very anti-Christ and anti-gospel.
Yeah, for sure.
But let me swing it just as we kind of like wrap up our conversation. Let me swing it for a positive for a minute. How can AI be utilized to further impact the world for Jesus Christ? I mean, obviously, we know the negatives. We've talked about some of the negatives, but how can we flip that story to make it more of a positive impact for Jesus?
I think this is the hardest question for me to answer. I just by my own bias and like inclination to be skeptical about these kinds of things. But I also don't think AI is going anywhere. Like I don't think it's like I think trying to imagine a world going forward without it is akin to trying to imagine a world going forward without electricity. Like the two things just they're just real. And so I do think we have to ask this question of like, well, how does this become something for the church to like that is beneficial? And I think you mentioned some of the smaller ways, like some of the things that it can generate that can be useful for conversation starting or for resource development and things like that. I think one of the things that often gets brought up around AI in these conversations is that like the idea that it's a tool. And and I understand that, and I think I agree with that. I do think it's beneficial to ask the question, well, what kind of tool is it really? Because like a hammer is a tool, but so is high tech like surgical tools that I don't know enough about to even be able to reference. Right? Like those are two very different tools, and they have very different levels of access.
Right.
Um, and I think one of the things that would is helpful for the church to think about answering this question, that can give really good, like, this is good news that has come about because AI is a thing. And that is even able to point to who God is and the life that Jesus is wanting for us and things like that, is to spend some time thinking about, what if AI is one of those highly specialized tools that does a very certain thing in a very certain way. And now to apply this, we have to have this conversation less around the idea of the church being the group of people that meet on Sunday and throughout the week and worship and all of that, and asking in that context, what can AI do? And think about it more in terms of, what are the people in your community, in your congregation, doing in their lives, where AI may be an assistant for them to bring about goodness through Jesus in the roles that they play. And so it's easy for me to imagine someone, I'm the most excited about some of the medical developments that AI is already bringing about and what I think is potentially great there. And so it's easy for me to imagine someone in a church who is in the medical field, in the medical sciences, who says, I feel called by God to bring the most flourishing and health to the people that I care for, that I can. That God wants people to be well. I mean, we see Jesus healing people, so the idea that what Jesus wants is for people to be well, I think is one that we can affirm. And so I'm going to go into this role, and I'm going to find out what this tool can do and how I can best use it to love my patients, love my neighbors, love the people who are in need around me in the ways that Jesus would want me to.
Yeah.
And considering the people God would want me to. It's easy for me to think about a question for the church about, like, around, so one of the temptations in our culture is that all of these kinds of things always tend to find their ways into the hands of the people that have the most, right? Like the wealthy folks have the easiest access to the technology. So what would it look like for the church to imagine a calling to bring some of those great tools and resources to folks who wouldn't otherwise be able to access it? Folks in our community who don't have enough and will never know how having like high-tech access to diagnostic tools could bring about real change in their lives. I think about somebody who I know who is going through a whole series of health problems, but who doesn't have the means to get really top-notch care. And so what would it mean for the church or people in the medical field, or however this would play itself out, to ask, well, how can AI help us get that care to those folks?
Yeah.
Because Jesus loves those folks, and access to those kinds of resources is something I believe Jesus wants those folks to have.
Yeah.
And so I think it's along those kinds of lines. I mean, it's a challenge to, I think, what we understand our call to be and what our relationship to the kingdom is and to the people around us is, to have to think differently about how we answer that question. And I think the beauty of it is that I don't know that there's an answer to that question that doesn't always mean there's people involved in the process. Like there needs to be gospel carriers of this tech who say, I have good news that because God created humans with this amazing capacity for creativity, we've created some amazing technology that can help you know fuller health and well-being, not because this robot is great, but because God is great and loves you, and we want to make that available to you. So I think stuff like that. There's a lot of potential in that, but it requires a lot of that talking in relationship, right? That we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I know that, you've given us some things to think about, and hopefully those who listen to this episode of the podcast will take to heart the process. I've never heard you in this conversation talk about, writing AI completely out. But as you said a minute ago, figuring out how to use that tool for the excellence for the glory of God. That is what we need to pursue looking at and how to best utilize this. So Joe, thanks so much for
my pleasure.
Your insight. And friends, this is a big subject for us to be talking about in the life of the church. And so don't be afraid to talk about it. You don't have to be the expert. You just got to have some conversation. You bring some people who might be a little smarter in the game to you, and have that conversation too, as we continue to look for different ways to continue the gospel message here in Ohio. So Joe, thanks again for your insight. Appreciate that very much.
Thanks for having me. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Friends, we're super excited about what is happening this fall in Ohio. And the next episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking to Kyle Hayes with a great organization, the Church of God Ministries called Children of Promise. So you will not want to miss that. But until the next time, we'll see you then. Have a great day.